They come often by boat, dangerous crossings arranged by people smugglers. And yet more and more are entering the UK illegally this way. The government says that has to stop. So it's come up with changes to the way claims for asylum work. How fair is the new system? This is Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. We will be examining on this programme whether this will discourage illegal immigration or, as some have suggested, merely divide the arrivals into groups of good and bad refugees.
Last month, the UK government announced a new asylum seekers plan. Its aim, it said, was to stop people entering the country illegally to claim refuge. Various groups and people are currently being invited to send in their thoughts as part of a consultation process. It was described as the biggest overhaul of the asylum system in decades.
An end-to-end reform that will basically now look at how we can create safe and legal routes to protect people who are fleeing persecution.
The plan means anyone arriving illegally in the UK will not have the same entitlements as those who arrive in the country via legal routes. But campaigners and charity organisations have criticised the plan as unjust and inhumane. They say it will divide refugees into welcome and unwelcome groups. More than 8,000 people arrived in Britain last year by crossing the English Channel in small boats, according to official records, although the number of applications for asylum in the UK fell by 18%. Will the new system be fair to those risking their lives to seek shelter?
Well, it's great to be able to say that we can go straight to Brussels, where we see Catherine Woollard, Secretary General at the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. Then to Leeds, and we welcome Sirriyeh, Senior Lecturer in Sociology at Lancaster University, and in Windsor, just to the west of London, Andre Walker, Political Commentator. Now, I don't normally start a programme by showing a graphic, but I think it's important in this regard that we bring this up on screen. It shows the number of channel crossings by migrants in small boats since July of 2019 up to September of last year. And if you look at it this time last year, the numbers were very, very small indeed. March 20, around about 250. If you look at September, it is close to 2,000. And looking at figures from Migration Watch earlier today, they reported on the 2nd of April that 1,392 have come over in small boats already this year. Catherine, let me ask you this. Does Britain have a problem here that it needs to sort out?
No, we would put these figures in context. And if you look at the overall number of asylum claims in the UK, it's actually at a historical low. And indeed, most of those arriving are refugees, according to the government's own figures. So that is a more than manageable situation. What we see is a disproportionate focus on the small number of people who arrive in that rather dramatic and dangerous way of crossing the Channel. And for that reason, the plan presented by Priti Patel attempts to restrict those movements and adopts a probably illegal, punitive approach to people who arrive other than through resettlement channels.
But there are probably only two illegal routes into Britain, either by lorry or train through the Channel Tunnel or on a ferry or in these boats. And I think 50% of the arrivals in the UK now are via these boats. That is an issue, isn't it?
Well, that's it's a lower figure, and it's certainly much lower if we look at the pre-COVID time. Of course, due to the COVID travel restrictions, the numbers are very distorted for last year. It's a small number, and I think the other thing to bear in mind is that it actually contravenes international law to take a punitive approach to people who arrive irregularly. The nature of displacement, which is at record levels, is such that people have no choice but to cross borders in irregular ways in order to seek protection. And the Refugee Convention expressly forbids states from penalising them for doing so.
Okay, we will come back to the number of people received by Britain in just a moment compared to other European countries. Andre, I know you think that most of these people who arrive by these means are economic migrants rather than those who are fleeing persecution. What evidence do you have for that?
Well, I think my issue is fundamentally this. We have made a huge mistake in changing the way that we look at refugees. The aim, I think, is a simple one and a really good one, that anybody who is displaced from their homes should go to the nearest neutral country where they can be protected with a view to returning home. Over the years, I think we've changed into this concept that if there is a war in your country, you will leave that country and never, ever return. Because I think that if you're talking about, say, somewhere like Libya, the idea that somebody would move to Manchester with any hope of going back, I think is wrong. And so from my point of view, look, we've got to now clarify the position. Do we want people to settle in the United Kingdom, or do we want them to go to the nearest safe country? And in my view, it should be the nearest safe country in the case of refugees and in the case of economic
Britain only
migrants.
seems to want the best and the brightest. It's introduced a point system for
David,
legal migrants. It wants to send home those that are illegal migrants. It only wants the cream of the crop.
Well, but David, the solution to Libya's problems, or the solution to Somalia's problems in its day, or Kosovo's problems in its day, is not for every man, woman and child in the country to move to Birmingham. The solution is for them to move temporarily, just over the border very often, into a next country. I mean, it was great, by the way, when there was the Kosovo crisis, how Albania took a large number of people in. And because people were ethnic Albanians,
but rather different. They're rather
different.
I think you're going off the point slightly here. Rather different to be able to go from just over the border into the next country.
Well, but hang on a second. What you are talking about now, for people to have made it to the United Kingdom, they have to have crossed multiple countries, and so that goes away from being protected by the nearest neutral country into.
Okay, Catherine wants to come in. I'm going to give her the
Kingdom.
opportunity, and Ala, I'm not ignoring you. I will come to you in just a second. Catherine, what was it you wanted to say?
Yes, I think it's very interesting, Andre's point, because indeed, when it comes to displacement, the overwhelming responsibility is borne by the neighbouring countries. We're talking today on a Turkish television channel, and Turkey is the largest refugee hosting country in the world, with 4 million refugees currently hosted there. Other countries bordering Syria are really bearing the brunt of displacement. So I think there's a myth sometimes that everybody wants to come to the UK. It's not the case. I'm joining you here from Belgium, and we have many asylum applications here as well. And there are a small number of people who may eventually come to the UK, and it's often for reasons that we would understand. They have family there, they want to work, and their only foreign language is English. And as I mentioned before, indeed, most of them arriving now are entitled to protection.
I am going to bring in Ala at this point so that it just doesn't become a two-way conversation. Catherine, sorry to have to stop you, but Ala, I know you think this is a two-tier system. It gives us bad migrants and good migrants, the bad migrants being the illegal ones. But isn't that what they're trying to say? If you come here illegally, you really are bad. You should get out.
But I mean, I think this is really a false dichotomy, that this division of people, for the first time formalizing this division of people on the basis of how they are seeking sanctuary. So at the moment, this doesn't come into the merits of someone's asylum claim, the way in which they have arrived, whether that's through a formal resettlement scheme or through an irregular route of entry. And for the majority of people actually who are refugees in the UK, this is deeply disturbing, because for the majority of those people, they have entered through irregular routes because there has been no safe and legal route for them to seek sanctuary. So this would mean, and these are people who have been found to be genuine refugees, to use the sort of language of the Home Office. What would have happened in their cases? Would they have been prevented from rebuilding their lives, prevented from gaining protection here? And just to add, really, I was going to say that I would agree with Catherine, what Catherine was saying, that the majority of people, actually, if you look at the top 10 countries receiving refugees, these are countries that directly border countries where there are conflicts. And this is not just this is kind of a convenient arguments to make, given where we are geographically.
May I say this about the United Kingdom? These are its own figures from the British government. It has to say that the top 5 European countries for arrivals via resettlement schemes, which you've talked about, genuine resettlement schemes, are first the UK. This is 2015 to 2019. Then Sweden, France, Norway, and Germany. Isn't Britain getting painted with a very bad PR brush for whatever reason, when in fact it is actually being rather generous, Ala?
I would say, I mean, yes, if you look at the resettlement figures alone, but that doesn't take into account the fact that there are vastly greater numbers of people seeking asylum through having arrived themselves in the destination countries, in Germany, in France, in other European countries. So if you look at the figures in their totality, we get a very different picture. But of course, we would welcome, the resettlement that does take place through these schemes, and an expansion of this. This is, that is a good aspect of the proposal. I guess if you are, it's very vague in terms of the wording of how this is going to be expanded, but that is promising. However, what happens to people who are here now, who have arrived?
Let's bring in Andre here, because I want to use him to counterbalance some of the arguments you were trying to say.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental immorality to what Ala has just said. If you listen back to what she was talking about, she sees it as a fundamental societal good to welcome as many people to the United Kingdom as possible. I don't believe on a small island it's possible to do that. I think we have to do our international duty, but the idea that you're just going to bring people lock, stock and barrel is a bad thing for the following reasons.
Well, let her respond to that.
No.
So I would say it's a misrepresentation of my views to say that we are, that I'm saying that everybody, that the UK should be welcoming everybody that needs sanctuary in the world. And that's not what's happening, and that's not what would happen, and that's not even what I'm arguing for. I think it's a matter of recognising that the UK has a responsibility alongside our international partners to play its part in resettlement programmes.
But is it not acting responsibly, and as it puts it in the government document, introducing a temporary protection status for those who are inadmissible but cannot be returned to their country of origin, as it would breach international obligations? They are being responsible, are they not?
Could I come in?
These are people who
Catherine, please, you come in.
Yeah. I think there are positive elements of the UK government's plan, of Priti Patel's plan, and we shouldn't dismiss them. So resettlement is extremely important, because this is the way that people can then avoid dangerous and traumatic journeys. And particularly for child refugees, the journey may be even more traumatic than the experience of war that they've already suffered from. So that's a very important aspect for the UK. The problem is that this cannot be then used to justify measures that are attempts to deny responsibility on the part of the UK, such as fairly and efficiently considering the asylum applications of those who arrive through other means.
There is a bureaucratic backlog, undoubtedly, and the UK say this is one of the reasons it's doing it, but it also says it's doing it to deter, in the case of those coming over by boat, that the people smugglers. Will it in any way do that, Andre?
No,
will it deter them?
Yeah, look, I think there's a major concern here, and it's a genuine concern. Look, the English Channel is one of the choppiest seas in the world, and it's pretty cold. It is incredibly dangerous, even though it's not a particularly wide stretch of waterway. We saw what happened in the Mediterranean with these people smugglers. We've got to do something to discourage people from coming here illegally. It's not so much people jumping on the back of the lorry.
I was thinking about this, and I don't see how introducing laws in the UK, which many of these migrants will be totally unaware of, because of their background, because of their education, etc. From coming to the UK, maybe the people smugglers who know the laws, but they're not going to stop taking the money if they've got a chance to do so.
But
how
David,
will it stop the people smugglers?
David, what I'm about to say might sound over the top, but if you think about it, the sensible thing to do is to take people from the United Kingdom into the next door neutral country, even though that's expensive, and process the applications there. Because what it means is that it's a waste of time to cross the channel illegally. You are better going to the next door neighbouring country. And that is the safest way to process people.
May I come in on the question of deterrence?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of myths about deterrence, and unfortunately, the government tends to be driven by the idea of pull factors, that people are being pulled to the UK. In fact, all the evidence shows that it's push factors driving them away from their homes. The way to deal with the smuggling issue is indeed resettlement and safe and legal pathways. So the government is on the right track.
I'm sorry, I don't see how that's going to deter people smugglers from bringing in those people who don't think they will be able to get here in a legal fashion.
If you let me finish, the difficulty is that there aren't enough safe and legal places, because if you want to reduce the demand for people smugglers, you have to also recognise that there's record levels of displacement, with 80 million people currently displaced. So there needs to be a massive expansion in resettlement. I'm afraid an unrealistic element of the government's plan is the question of outsourcing responsibility to other countries. They're now attempting to negotiate bilateral agreements with other EU countries to readmit people who've arrived in the UK. Speaking to you from one of the countries that's being targeted, I see no appetite whatsoever for this. It would be more realistic for the UK to invest in the UK asylum system and deal with what is an entirely manageable caseload of people who are primarily refugees, rather than unrealistic suggestions that people will be returned or processed in other countries.
Okay, Hala, can I ask you specifically about the offshore processing centres? It has a sinister ring to it. Does it upset you, or do you think it would just speed things up?
I mean, it would certainly not speed things up. I mean, there's just a very brief mention.
Well, why not? Why can't you get more people through somewhere like that if they are sort of all in one place and you just tackle it in one go?
Well, we know, first of all, from, and this government is very keen on following Australian-style immigration policies. We know from the experience of offshore detention centres in Manus Island, in the Republic of Nauru, that these have had terrible human rights records, that people have been stranded in these detention centres for years on end. People who have been found to have legitimate asylum claims, who have been found to be recognised as refugees, have been held in limbo in these centres, waiting to rebuild their lives. So I don't see this. I see this as offshore detentions as a means of putting people geographically at a distance from the UK, so that they are out of place, out of sight, out of mind, and that's where I fear that this policy would lead.
And there are two major obstacles.
No, Catherine, I've got to bring Andre back in at this point.
Sure.
Look. The fact of the matter is that the solution to our problem is not to pick up migrant boats at Dover. The solution is to have I hate the phrase holistic approach, but I think that's what you really need. But we need some clarity on the following issues.
Does that mean sort of turning them around and pushing them back the other way?
No. I think what we need to do first and foremost is we need clarification between two things. Which people are being temporarily protected because their home country is war-torn, and how many people are being permanently settled in another country? Those two are completely different propositions. And just because you are a genuine refugee, just because you're a genuine asylum seeker, doesn't mean you get to pick whichever country in the world you fancy moving to. And so until we stop the confusion between those two issues, we won't get anywhere.
Okay, Catherine, I know you've got a point to make, but it is a sort of pick and choose, isn't it? Because if you start off in Spain, if you've come from Libya, you could stay in Spain, you could stay in France, you could stay in Germany, Holland, but you choose the UK.
Well, for most people, their number one preference is actually what Andre mentions. It's return to the country of origin. And this is also preferred by refugee rights advocates as the first durable solution for people with refugee status. The difficulty is that it's just not realistic in many cases. Right now, the largest number of refugees in Europe are from Syria, and there's very little prospect of it being safe for them to return. So that means in the meantime, there have to be means to try and include them in society.
But it is a pick and choose for some people, because as Andre was suggesting, they might prefer Birmingham to Bangui.
I'm not sure I'm going to answer that. I mean, the resettlement, the only way people would be able to arrive in the UK from neighbouring countries, is offered to the most vulnerable of refugees, and that's based on UNHCR's selection. So the people that the UK will accept under the resettlement programme will be only the most vulnerable.
Okay, I'm going to go
So
around
the
table, if I may, which I suppose is fairly logical since it's a round table, even if it is a virtual one, and ask you, this is a consultation process. Ala, you first of all, can you pick one good thing from what Priti Patel has said and one bad thing, and give us your advice to pass on to her?
Well, I would say the rather vague proposal to expand the number of resettlement places, that is something that's positive. I would be interested to hear in more detail how many places would be offered, what's the kind of criteria. In terms of one bad thing, I would say what I've referred to as the two-tiered asylum system, which is stigmatizing and vilifying people on the basis of the route through which they try to seek sanctuary, and denying people that have very legitimate asylum claims, denying them the rights and entitlements that refugees currently have.
Catherine?
As well as resettlement, I think a positive element is an attempt to find a legal status for people who can't be returned. In terms of negatives, as well as the punitive approach to people who have no choice but to arrive irregularly, I would say the failure to put a priority on investing and putting resources into the UK asylum system, and instead relying on what are, I'm afraid, fantasy options of outsourcing the UK's rather limited responsibilities to other countries and other regions who show no willingness or interest in assuming those responsibilities from the UK, given that it's not really facing a huge challenge compared to other places.
Catherine, I'm going to come back to you at the end of the programme, which isn't far off, to ask you to explain something that you told one of our producers. But Andre, I want to go to you. 1 plus, 1 minus, and what would happen to Britain if this sort of policy isn't brought in?
Well, look, I think that the fundamental problem here is that our asylum system doesn't work. We need to take in those people that we have a duty to take in, and we need to support the global effort to support those refugees. So I think that expanding the programme, frankly, to an unlimited extent of settling people that we have a duty to settle. But also we've got to say, no, I'm afraid arriving on a boat is dangerous. It caused a humanitarian catastrophe in the Mediterranean. We won't allow that. And I'm not going to be critical, but here is my negative side. I think we as the United Kingdom and indeed the French government have failed to work out between the two of us what we're going to do about desperate people attempting to jump onto lorries and indeed to jump onto dinghies. It's not safe for them. Neither country likes the situation, but we have so far failed to deal with it. And I don't see a great deal in resolving that problem here.
Catherine, let me come back to you. You said to one of our producers, stopping illegal immigrants or trying to stop illegal immigration will never work. Why won't it?
Because with 80 million people forcibly displaced, there's always going to be a demand and a need for people to move to places where they can be safe. This isn't actually illegal. It's not illegal to cross borders to seek protection. And I think a holistic approach in a way is needed. It's tackling the causes of forcible displacement in the first place, doing more to tackle conflict, repression, persecution that leads to people being displaced.
But will this not stop illegal immigration in some way?
I don't see that at all, because it's based on the presumption that people are choosing to come to the UK due to some kind of generosity on the UK's part, whereas in fact the UK has already a very harsh immigration and asylum regime, and it doesn't deter people from seeking protection there, because in many cases they have no choice. And as I said earlier on in the discussion, they have reasons that we would understand for trying to get to the UK itself, such as family or speaking the language because they desperately want to work to support their families.
Okay. Just a final word, if we can, from you, Ala.
I would say, I think, well, I would agree with Catherine that I don't think this is going to work even on with the aims and terms for the Home Office itself. And I don't think that it's actually going to stop the illegal migration that they are so concerned about. But also, in humanitarian terms, I think this is going to be really, really catastrophic in terms of the potential reduction of the rights and impacts on the welfare of people who.
But it might stop some of it.
Protection.
Very quickly, if you would, it might stop some of it. Yes or no?
I don't know in terms of numbers, but I mean, all research evidence available shows that increased deterrent policies just do not work. When people are desperate to leave, they will do. Thank
you, each and every one of you. I feel very rude interrupting, but I'm trying to cover as many points as possible, and you certainly did that. Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, Ala, and Andre, and thank you wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable for taking the time to join us. There's plenty more on our YouTube channel, this programme, and many from the past 3 or 4 years. Please take a trip there if you possibly can, but we hope to have you back with us next time, whatever. From me, David Foster, from the team, thanks for watching. Goodbye.